We're back on NFL Fantasy Live. Time for another round of Michael F. Florio starts and sits. Had a pretty good week last week. Let's get to the running backs as well as the wide receivers. Mike, who are we starting at the tailback position?
Pretty good last week. Big swing and miss with J.K. Dobbins, though, because that was a swing and miss for everyone in that London game. But I think he's going to fare better against the other New York, or should I say New Jersey team this week, because the Giants, they are top 5 in yards after contact and in explosive runs allowed to running backs. Dobbins is top 2 in the NFL in both explosive runs and yards after contact. Would not be surprised if game script is on his side. And we know when they have a lead, we see a lot of J.K. Dobbins grinding out the clock. So forgive him for what he did in London. Forgive all of the Broncos, really. I think this is a get-right game for Dobbins. And I think it's a get-right game for another running back who played across the pond last week in Breece Hall. He gets the Panthers. And look, I get the Panthers are no longer a slam dunk matchup for running backs. They're more middle of the pack, but this is about the volume that he has seen. Hall has averaged 18 touches per game, and he leads the Jets in red zone targets right now. He is second or tied for second in the NFL with Dobbins in explosive runs, so more volume means more chances for big plays. And I think if Garrett Wilson is out this week, we see Breece Hall even heavier targeted in the passing game. So I know it's been an up and down year for Hall. I think you still ride with him this week.
Yeah, and you're spot on about the Panthers defense, something we were chasing around for running backs, as you saw with Javonte last week. Not anymore. Let's go to the bench. Who are we putting on there for running backs?
A big name and one that I was excited for this summer, and you won't hear me hyping him up much in the future. Kenneth Walker. I still believe Kenneth Walker is a very talented and explosive back. The issue is his team necessarily doesn't. Charbonnet routinely plays more snaps. He gets steady volume on the ground, including the goal line work. And in the 5 games that Charbonnet and Walker have played together, Walker's averaging 10 fantasy points per game, and he's outscored Charbonnet just 1 time in those 5 games. This new role for him has made him a big play reliant flex option, and this week he gets a Texans defense that has allowed explosive runs at the 7th lowest rate in the NFL. So I'm not really banking on the big play, and if that isn't there, I think you're going to be wanting more if you start Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, frustrating situation, frustrating backfield for fantasy managers. And again, if you want to see the full list, everybody go to NFL.com/startsit to see all the work as we switch over to wide receivers. Who are we starting in week 7?
Rashee Rice is back, and for the Chiefs, he should be back for you guys. I know a lot of you have been waiting patiently the last 6 weeks. If you've waited this long, get him in your lineups, no questions asked. Just reminding you how good he was last year. In his 3 healthy games, he was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy, led the NFL in catches, was second in yards, scored over 17 fantasy points in each, and was elite metrically. Plus, it's a soft landing spot. The Raiders have allowed 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and last season, 88% of his yards came against zone coverage for Rashee Rice. The Raiders play zone at the 2nd highest rate in the NFL. And for those of you out there trying to make trades for him, you've waited too long. The time is over. No one is trading him now after waiting 6 weeks. And then I think you start Deebo Samuel. I know he disappointed last week. I don't care. You see who is on the other side. Plus, Deebo, give him a pass for last week. He has scored 17 or more fantasy points in 4 of 6 games. And the Cowboys, they've allowed the 2nd most yards, most touchdowns, most fantasy points to wide receiver. They're top 8 in yards to out wide receivers and into slot receivers. Deebo bounces all over the field. So I think he's a great play. And in fact, we're hearing Terry might return this week. I'd play Terry too if he's back.
Yeah, but on the good side for the Cowboys, they have that trade ammunition, according to Jerry Jones, to make that defense that much better. Let's find out who's going on the bench, Mike. I'm a little worried looking at this.
Yeah, look, I'm wearing Eagles green, but it's not because I love the Eagles this week. I think Skinny Batman, unfortunately, could hit the bench. Look, he's just been big play reliant this year. He is under 10 fantasy points in 4 of 6 games. And I know you just saw that play. You're like, well, if Jalen Hurts hits him, that's a long touchdown. We've been saying that a lot this year. And Devonta Smith, just 5 targets in every game except for 1. And in that one game, he had 6. They're not going consistently his way. And the Vikings, I said he's big play reliant. Well, they've allowed just 2 deep passes to be completions all year. They've allowed just 1 top 15 fantasy wide receiver. He is not a must-sit. It depends on what your options are. But if you have the capability of maybe going in another direction this week, I think I would go that way.
We're back on NFL Fantasy Live. If you have internet access, go to NFL.com/starts and sits to see Michael F. Florio's full list, but now we're going to focus on the quarterbacks as well as the tight ends. We'll start with the good news. Who's starting at your quarterback spot?
Jared Goff. The indoor cat is back to being at home in Detroit, where he tends to play his best football. And I'll be honest, I was shocked to see that Jared Goff led the NFL in touchdown passes. Like, it just does not feel like that is the case right now. But he's getting the Bucs this week, who are in the top 10 in passing yards, touchdowns, and fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. They've allowed a top 12 signal caller in 4 of their 6 games. And with MV Baker on the other side and a very banged up Lions secondary, this game has ScoreFest written all over it. So I think you want exposure to that one. And then I'm starting Bo Nix. I keep saying you need to forgive the players who let you down in London last week, and that includes Bo Nix, who at least is running with at least 20 or more rushing yards in 4 of his last 5 games. But this week for me is about the matchup. The Giants have allowed the 4th most yards, passing yards, and the 2nd most on deep passes. So big plays are there this week for Bo Nix. They also struggle to generate pressure and sacks. I think this is a get-right game for a lot of Broncos.
Yes, and a lot of folks will be excited to hear that Bo Nix is going to have that bounce-back performance. But who's not bouncing back? Who's going on your bench this week at the quarterback spot?
So every Tuesday I go on the Insiders and I do waivers, and I've been talking about Jackson Dart and that he brings more upside than anyone at quarterback for weeks now. So you probably are annoyed that I'm going to say sit him again. Look, I took the L for saying to sit him last week, but this week he gets the Denver Broncos, and I just hate that matchup. Denver is in the bottom 3 in passing yards, touchdowns, and fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. They generate sacks at by far the highest rate in the NFL. It's 13% of their dropbacks go for sacks, whereas everyone else is 9% or less. And they do not allow quarterbacks to run against them at all. In the first 5 weeks, 15 rushing yards, and then last week they were the first team to hold Justin Fields below 40. So it is just such a tough matchup in his 4th NFL game that if you have the capability of getting away, I think I would do so.
Yeah, rough spot for the 2 New Jersey teams going back-to-back against the Denver Broncos. Let's go to the tight end spot, starting with the good. Who's starting this week?
Look, I promise you I am no longer the Kyle Pitts fan of record here. That could be Adam Rank. He's got that one. But I do think this is a week where you could potentially stream Kyle Pitts and get him into your starting lineup. If you need a tight end, I especially like this if Darnell Mooney is out once again this week. But the 49ers, they have ranked middle of the pack against tight end this season, but that was before Fred Warner got hurt. And I cannot state enough how big of an injury that is for the 49ers defense, especially in the middle of the field. Plus, they've allowed the most yards to players lined up in the slot, and no player lines up more in the slot for the Falcons than Kyle Pitts. So I do think he is a sneaky play. And then Mason Taylor. You heard Rank talking him up earlier. I'm very much so on board here as well. Just like everyone else I keep talking about in the London game. Last week was a flop, but we need to look past that. With Garrett Wilson likely out this week or potentially out, he could be the top target for Justin Fields, and it could not come at a better time because the Panthers have allowed the most yards, 3rd most touchdowns, and 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends. So Mason Taylor, someone that you might have grabbed off waivers this week, I think he could go right into your starting lineup.
That's always great when you get somebody for 1 week and then keep them going in the next week, especially if you're having to deal with an injury. But who are we not putting in our lineups at the tight end spot?
TJ Hawkinson. It's just not working out as I thought it would. He just has 1 game with over 10 fantasy points, and he needed a touchdown to do so. Plus, since Jordan Addison has returned, Hawkinson is averaging less than 6 targets per game and only 39 yards per game. And then on top of the lack of production, it's an insanely hard matchup. The Eagles have allowed the 3rd fewest yards and fantasy points to tight ends. I know they're a little banged up on defense, but they're still strong cover in the middle of the field. So I would play Mason Taylor or Kyle Pitts this week before I would play TJ Hawkinson.
Again, folks, NFL.com/start-sit to see the full list for Michael F. Florio. Time for higher or lower with Michael F. Florio and Adam Rank as we get a look at whether or not the projections on NFL.com match up with what they think. So the number higher or lower than 19.5 points for Justin Fields. You are the biggest Justin Fields supporter that we've ever had a conversation with, Mike. What's he do this week? Higher or lower than 19.5?
Yeah, I'm nothing if I'm not loyal to my guys. And as the Justin Fields fan of record on this show, I'm going with higher here for the Jets signal caller in a great matchup against the Panthers. Look, fantasy point-wise, they might not be the best matchup for quarterbacks. But Justin Fields has been under pressure at by far the highest rate in the NFL, and it's not even close. This week, he gets the Panthers, who've generated pressure at the lowest rate in the NFL. And I think he's actually going to have time to throw the ball, which is a great thing. It also means more potential running plays just like that, which is why we love him for fantasy football purposes. Plus, Panthers have allowed a top 9 fantasy quarterback in 3 straight. I think this is a get-right game for Justin Fields. And all you guys out in New York, please stop questioning if he should still be the starter. Like, we don't need that in our fantasy lives. We want Justin Fields as often as we could get him.
Yes, we'll go to the actual longtime Justin Fields supporter as we get to Daniel Jones, higher or lower ranked than 16.6 points against the Chargers.
I'm going to go higher. I think that Daniel Jones is going to reach that plateau. As a matter of fact, he's averaged more than 16 fantasy points in 4 of 6 games this season. And while we don't think of Daniel Jones as the prolific runner that Justin Fields is, he is still good with his feet. He has scored 4 rushing touchdowns this season. That's tied for the second most amongst quarterbacks. He's also pushing the ball down the field. Like, we really love the arm of Daniel Jones this season. He's averaged over 8 yards per pass this year. That's tied for the 5th, or actually it's just the 5th most in the NFL. So it's going to be an interesting game. Like, this Colts team continues to impress. They kind of low-key fly under the radar. Daniel Jones continues to go out there and be a big factor in our fantasy in real lives. So I do believe he gets that higher number.
Yeah, what a potential comeback player of the year in Daniel Jones. Oddly enough, let's go to Bill Merritt, the rookie for the Washington Commanders. A little bit of a down week. Mike, what's he do against the Dallas Cowboys? Higher or lower than 11.7?
Look, everyone calling him Bill got old quick, but Bill Merritt is hilarious. I'm going to call him that as often as we can. I think he gets higher. Look, I said in the A block, I think that you want to start everyone, all your fantasy offensive players in this game, and that includes Bill Merritt, who, yes, he needs to pull a tiki barber and carry a football everywhere he goes, lose this little case of fumbleitis that he is dealing with, but he has been so effective as a runner. He is top 4 in the NFL in yards per carry and yards after contact per carry. He leads the league in explosive run rate. And the Cowboys, not only do they give up a ton of points each week, and every game with them is a score fest, they've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. And I think with Jaden's legs, that's just going to continue to open up running holes for Bill Merritt.
Yeah, must-see TV every opportunity the Cowboys are playing anybody, because it's offenses are going to be successful. As we go to, speaking of the Dallas Cowboys, right? Javonte Williams having a resurgent season, and then the Panthers came in and ruined all of that. Higher or lower than 16 points against Washington.
I'm going to say that the trend continues. He's going to be lower this week. Listen, first of all, I have not let go of a single share of Jadon Blue. I'm still a firm believer. It's my new Kamani Vidal from last year, where I just wouldn't let him go and be like, nope, I'm riding with this ship. Obviously, when you look at Javonte Williams, great start to the season, but his rushing attempts have decreased in back-to-back games. He averaged just over 2 yards per rush in week 6. That was the 3rd fewest amongst running backs. And believe it or not, if you've only seen Washington play one game, you're like, they can't stop the running back. They're actually pretty good. They've allowed the 10th fewest yards rushing per game. I think it's just a testament of how good DeAndre Swift is. So for me, I think they'll be able to corral Javonte Williams this week, so I'm going to go lower here.
All right, lower there, and a little bit of wish casting Jadon Blue as we get to A.J. Brown. If you only watch one game, if you just watch this season, you think A.J. Brown is some pedestrian wide receiver, higher or lower than 13.1 fantasy points.
I have one team where I pick up Blue and drop him, pick him up weekly. I have a bunch of teams with A.J. Brown. I'm starting him everywhere. I'm saying higher. And look, I know just last segment I was saying that it is a tough matchup against the Vikings secondary. I'm not going to lie, it is. That's why I said to sit Devonta Smith. But this is about volume going A.J. Brown's way. He has at least 8 targets in each of his last 5 games. We know that there's been a couple of deep balls that should have been connected that just weren't. So despite the matchup being as bad as the vibes are in Philly right now, if you continue to feed A.J. Brown at the rate that he has been getting targets, I still believe good days are coming. I think him and Hurts are far too talented for this to be the product that we see on the field. Last week might have been the start of signs of life. So, yeah, I might say sit Devonta, skinny Batman, but there's no way I'm saying sit brolic Batman. So I'm riding with A.J. Brown.
All right, A.J. Brown gets a start and higher than 13 fantasy points. It was a solid week in a season that hasn't been for Brian Thomas Jr., ranked higher or lower than 12.7 points in London?
All right. It should have been a lot more. I'm going to go higher in this one. It should have been a lot more because I witnessed this happen in reality of Brian Thomas catching a football only to have a referee live the embodiment of that meme, go out there and make this about you because, oh, Travis Hunter's foot was in the wrong spot. Stop it. But what we've loved, I really actually have loved the connection between Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. over the last couple of weeks. He's had at least 12 fantasy points in each of the last 2 games, 48 targets this season. That's the one thing. Like, he's getting targeted a ton. Now, when you go back and watch the games, they're not always great targets. Sometimes Brian Thomas Jr., to his credit, has to make business decisions because I'm not like the guy who watches the NLCS. Is like, why isn't this guy leaning into that ball? Like, I understand why Brian Thomas Jr. might not be so apt to chase some of these throws from Trevor Lawrence, but the connection is getting better. And one of the things that I really love is that Liam Cohen is coming out and addressing it and addressing the fact that the Jacksonville Jaguars need to play better football and be more efficient. I think we're going to start seeing that over the next couple of weeks. I feel very confident in Brian Thomas Jr. this week.